Well, good morning. It's Wednesday, February 18th, 2026. I'm Andrew Pritchard. I'm filling in for Eric Snodgrass today. He is on the move, moving to and from a couple of events today. So I'm going to jump in and fill in for him. I'm going to take kind of a look at some of the near-term weather risks that we've got here. We've got big fire weather conditions going on yesterday and today across parts of the plains. Moving into the Midwest today, we've also got a severe weather risk across portions of the Ohio Valley on Thursday afternoon. And then we'll talk about some of the changes here with some of the storm systems coming up over the next week or two. But thanks for letting me join you here for just a little bit here on this Wednesday morning. I want to start off looking back at yesterday afternoon. I've got the satellite pulled up here, looking at fire hotspots here, especially big one here in the Woodward area, started in the Oklahoma Panhandle. This one actually moved north and northeast into Kansas, crossing the border. A really big smoke plume with that one at times, kind of that pyrocumulus behavior. Other hotspots down here across parts of the Texas Panhandle. I know there was another fire up here in portions of northwest Kansas, and then another pretty intense one in the Lyman, Colorado area. At one point, you could see the smoke plume from this one right there. Not quite as intense as the one down here on the Oklahoma-Kansas border, but then also we had a little bit of a kind of a boundary here where we had some blowing dust associated with some of the stronger winds there as well, some blowing dust across the Texas Panhandle as well. So a windy, dusty, smoky, and at times very dangerous day. Colleague of mine, Brian Empfinger, he got some really dramatic shots of the fire in the Woodward, Oklahoma area. Welcome you to go check out his Twitter account. His handle is right over here. He's got a lot of really compelling images from yesterday's fire. Unfortunately, we've dropped the extreme fire risk here, but we still have critically dangerous fire conditions across parts of the central and southern plains here, from Colorado and Kansas through the panhandles into eastern New Mexico and parts of far western Texas. And then we also have critical values across portions of Iowa, southwest Wisconsin, and northwestern Illinois, with elevated values surrounding that from eastern Nebraska, almost toward the Chicago and Milwaukee metroplex here, across portions of northeast Illinois and southeastern Wisconsin. And that really overlaps with where we have those stronger winds in place. Of course, it's been very dry. We've got widespread dry soils and exposed soils here with the lack of the snowpack there. So all it takes is a warm, windy day like this with some of these early season surface lows moving through with very dry, conditions. And we're seeing temperatures in the 60s and 70s with low dew points. So those relative humidity values are 5 to 15% here. That's very dry. So it's simple ingredients there. Strong winds, warm and dry conditions. And then we've got the tinder there, the available fuels with the very dry vegetation. So this is what drives the critical risk across parts of Iowa and Illinois and to surrounding portions of Wisconsin and Nebraska today. It's an area of low pressure across portions of northern Minnesota during the mid-afternoon hours with strong winds on the south side of that. It's going to be a very warm day. So aside from, the fire risk, it is a pleasant early spring day. We've got another storm system ejecting here across the plains, though, that's going to have those winds again out of the southwest, anywhere from 20 to 30 miles per hour with gusts 40, 45 miles per hour at times across, again, the same region of portions of Kansas, Colorado, down into the panhandles and eastern New Mexico. Now we'll flip it over to 500 millibars. This is where we can take a look at some of the short waves embedded within the jet stream flow that's kicking off some of our impactful weather. We've got kind of this lead wave. That's what's got the strong winds in Iowa and northern Illinois today. Has a very low chance of some showers here. If we had more moisture, this would certainly be enough to get some showers and storms going. But a bit of a moisture-starved disturbance here, moving through, bringing an otherwise blustery, warm day to parts of the central and eastern Corn Belt. This is the next kicker that comes around, though. Got the strong winds going across the southern plains today. This one ejects into the central U.S. for us on Thursday. You can kind of make it out here on Thursday morning, coming across parts of the Ozarks. Eventually, this is going to kick off some scattered storms across parts of the Ohio Valley, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, potentially getting in on this. You can kind of see just that very subtle little dip in the isobars here. Again, just kind of this little ripple right here, kind of showing us, sorry, I said isobars. It's not what I meant to say, if any meteorologists are watching that. But again, just this kind of little ripple right there in the heights, that's the short wave. That's just enough to kick off scattered showers and storms if you have the juice to support it, the fuel there. And we will have just enough. Flip it over here. We'll look at the available energy, convective available potential energy for the day on Thursday. And you can kind of see it right here. I mean, we're talking about low values in the 400 to 800 value or joules per kilogram range. That is, certainly modest when we compare it to some of our later spring and summer events that are going to start getting into that, 3 to 4,000 range here. So it's modest instability, but when you've got, an upper level wave here that's got flow, on the order of, 60 to 70 knots at 500 millibar. Again, that little ripple coming in here, just that little short wave, and you can make it out as I pull up dew points. And here's our moisture. We're going to pull dew points in the mid to upper 50s into parts of central Illinois and central Indiana. It's going to feel like spring out there, a more warm and muggy day, and you can see this punch of drier air coming in, and you can almost imagine the surface low pressure system here. You got that southerly flow, that moisture transport out on the leading edge here, wrapping around that area of low pressure, and then you've got the drier air coming in around on the backside and colder air off to the north as well. But really a bit of a kind of a pseudo dry line associated with this one as it punches into central Illinois, and it's kind of right out ahead of that you would expect scattered storms, and with just enough instability here combined with the presence of really intense wind shear. I showed you the upper level winds, but here's that low level jet that we kind of look for, fast winds out of the southwest here, a warm and muggy air mass with that little ripple in the flow up above it. That's going to be enough to kick off some scattered storms. We can flip over and look at the high resolution rapid refresh. We've got the latest run just came in. This is the 12Z, and I have actually 12Z, meaning it came out around 6 o'clock this morning Central Time, and I've not actually seen this one yet. So let's walk through it together. I want to first pull up the instability plot. This is the day on Wednesday. I mentioned that's upper level disturbance that's pushing through the Great Lakes with the strong winds here across Iowa and Illinois today. Being a bit moisture starved, there is some instability here, a little bit of fuel there, but the dew points, if I can go ahead and pull those up, probably talking about, near 50 degrees. And just kind of a weak front here, so not enough to get really robust thunderstorms going. We'll see what the HRRR is talking about. We'll look at reflectivity plus clouds here. As we head through the afternoon hours, this would be about midday Wednesday. You see this really intense dry punch coming through. A lot of sunny skies, a really beautiful warm sunny day across much of the central and eastern Corn Belt, and just maybe some scattered showers out ahead of that wave, but it mostly passes quietly west to east across the Corn Belt today and exits across the northeastern U.S. That's when we get into the day tomorrow. We'll start to look at that moisture getting pulled back up into the region. Here's the front that moves through today. You can watch those dew points dropping across Illinois and Indiana as that punch of drier air comes in. But then as the next wave starts to eject that one that's across the southern plains today, that lifts into the Ozarks by Thursday morning, punching into kind of the St. Louis area right along Interstate 70 during the early and middle afternoon hours tomorrow. And watch the dew points, go from the teens, very dry overnight across parts of central Illinois. You start to see that moisture lifting north ahead of the next area of low pressure. And it's kind of right along the leading edge of that moisture return, right beneath the upper level shortwave, and associated with that strong low level jet that you would expect scattered thunderstorms to develop. And they would have at least some potential to become severe. It's kind of an interesting day here where, we're not talking about a really intense thermal profile. And what I mean by that is, explosive thunderstorm activity. We're talking about relatively low-topped convection here. And it may be a day where we see some severe weather reports, maybe some damaging wind gusts, and perhaps even a couple of tornadoes across Illinois and Indiana with, I'm saying storms, but maybe thunderless storms, maybe not even tall enough and vigorous enough to generate lightning within those updrafts. So kind of a unique severe weather setup. We do see this sometimes in the Midwest, this low-top convection that's intense enough and rotating, thanks to the wind shear there, that it's spinning and it's producing some tornado reports, but not tall enough and not intense enough to produce a lot of lightning. So let's take a look at the radar here, or the, seeing the moisture return. We've got dew points here. The HRRR is saying, 61 degree dew points. That would be plenty to get a couple of, intense updrafts going. So we'll flip it over here and look at the reflectivity. And certainly, let's zoom in here on Illinois and Indiana. The HRRR is forecasting some intense storms. Let's walk it back here. This will be 16Z. This is, right now, before we get to where we spring forward with the clocks, you subtract 6 here, and that gives you your central time. So 16 minus 6, this is 10 a.m. on Thursday. You see this cluster of showers kind of from Quincy, Illinois down to St. Louis. And it begins to intensify as, remember I just showed you the dew points, that moisture plume starts to lift north, matches up or meets, with the surface low and kind of that area of convergence where we've got showers and potentially some storms being generated. And as we get towards, this is, 1 o'clock, 2 p.m., 3 p.m., 4 p.m., this has the potential to be an intense storm, again, producing severe hail and maybe a couple of tornadoes as it rides that Interstate 70 corridor and then moves on into maybe Indianapolis as we get towards the mid and late afternoon. Even with some potential that additional storms could develop on the backside here as the actual cold front starts to push through on Thursday evening. So really an intense is not the word I meant, really an interesting, potentially intense kind of severe weather day across parts of Illinois and Indiana. This is instability from the HRRR, the high resolution rapid refresh. This would be about 11 a.m. This is your, noon, 1 o'clock. We're talking about values. The HRRR is saying a little higher than the NAM, and that's typical. The NAM is usually a little bit cooler, a little more modest here, where the HRRR is a little bit more aggressive, so you kind of walk that balance. But both models showing enough moisture, enough instability, combined with a lot of wind shear to potentially produce some severe storms here across parts of Illinois, Indiana, maybe far northern Kentucky during the day on Thursday. And I think that maybe we're looking at a few damaging wind reports and potentially some tornadoes, especially across really close to Interstate 70, I think, between St. Louis and Indianapolis is going to be your best chance for a couple of tornadoes. And we'll flip it over. We'll look at the latest day 2 severe weather outlook. Let's look at the Storm Prediction Center and what they're talking about. I've still got the fire weather forecast up here. We've already looked at that. But let's jump it over. We'll look at convective weather outlooks. And this is your outlook for tomorrow. I've got a slight risk. That's level 2 out of 5 across parts of Illinois, Indiana, neighboring portions of southwest Ohio, and then, as I mentioned, far northern portions of Kentucky. And it's for this same thing. If you go down and read the discussion, you can pull this up at spc.noaa.gov. And they say very similar to what I was just pointing out. We're looking at storms initiating near St. Louis with the strongest activity developing eastward, perhaps peaking while it spreads across portions of Illinois and eventually into central and southern Indiana early Thursday morning. And that is, again, exactly what the models have been kind of going after here with pretty good consistency. I mean, this is the morning run of the HRRR that I mentioned I had not seen yet. We just watched it live together. But what I had seen was the overnight HRRR, which said very similar. You saw why I got a bit excited there. It's maybe a little more aggressive with the morning run, but the same general idea here from the overnight HRRR and from the one that came out yesterday evening, which is a cluster of storms developing near St. Louis, maybe up toward Quincy, Illinois, and then potentially moving east across portions of central and southern Illinois into central and southern Indiana later in the day, and potentially bringing a severe weather risk into southwestern Ohio even as we get into the later evening into Thursday night. Same thing with portions of northern Kentucky. So now I want to kind of zoom out. One more thing I want to show you here, I guess, before I do that. This is an index that I want to get running on the agweather.com website, something we can kind of show you. This is a severe weather index that I put together and I'm running, independently on my machine right now as I work out some of the kinks and get it displaying properly. But this is what I call a conditional severe storm or conditional storm severity index. And what the shaded colors here are saying, if you look down at the color bars, this is looking at the environment, a couple factors here, and saying if a storm formed, how intense could that storm become? And you look here where we've got that, air mass lifting north, which is, again, the air mass that's supportive of severe storms, where it comes up and meets that boundary where we expect showers and storms to develop. It's kind of that intersection where we have the potential for some severe storms. Again, damaging winds, not a huge risk with this one. Could see some hail generated by some of these more intense updrafts, but certainly the potential. We've got the rotation there within the atmospheric profile, the curvature there with southeasterly winds at the surface, and then I showed you the westerly flow, very fast westerly flow above that. So you get that turning with height, and so any intense updraft is going to have the potential to rotate there. So again, just wanted to spend some time kind of breaking down the risk here. It's an early season risk, but it's a fairly interesting one. Thursday, early afternoon through the evening, watching portions of Illinois and Indiana for a couple of early season tornadoes. Now what I want to do is take a step back. We'll look wider here at the latest European model, some of the disturbances that follow this one as we head through the next week or two, and then I will let Matt and Eric kind of pick it up from there Thursday and Friday, getting back into the longer range forecast. Again, that's really their forte, which is, I'm glad for that. I don't like it as much as they do. I really prefer to stick my nose in the near-term severe weather risk. So that's why you don't hear from me so much with these longer videos. I'm spending a lot of time kind of just trying to figure out what's going to happen today, what's going to happen tomorrow, and who's going to be dealing with what. As we look longer range, though, the pattern continues to evolve. We've got this first wave that's going to come through today. I already mentioned the fire weather risk associated with that and the very light showers across parts of the Great Lakes into the Northeast. Here comes the next system. As we head through the afternoon today, it will be blasting across the southwestern U.S. You can see it making its way into the Ohio Valley during the day on Thursday. We continue to see southwest flow across, the region, or at least westerly, trailing off into the weekend. So we'll keep that chance for some precipitation. We'll flip it over and look at the actual precip forecast in a moment. But we keep that in the forecast, through the weekend before we get a bit of a change here. We're going to get some northwesterly flow out of the jet stream, kind of a familiar look for us here. And this is going to deliver a shot of colder air across parts of the central and eastern U.S., Great Lakes, as we head through the weekend into early next week. Not going to be a bitterly cold Arctic outbreak. We're not associating this one with the polar vortex or anything like that, but a bit of a pattern reset behind these big troughs. Mid to late this week, we'll get that shot of cooler air and a pattern change over the weekend into early next week. So here's as we get into late next week, we're still kind of seeing this look with, northwesterly flow crashing in. And so while some of the models were going pretty aggressively after kind of storm after storm after storm through the last week of February into the beginning of March, a little bit of a change, I think, at this point. And again, I'm going to leave it to Matt and Eric to break down some of the bigger impacts from this. But as I step back and walk us through, the next couple of weeks, here's your Thursday severe weather setup across Illinois and Indiana. A little bit of light snow on the backside of that. We're also depositing some badly needed snow across portions of the Rockies here with this next system that's trailing. I mentioned, again, we keep that precip going, slowly trailing off through the weekend. Got some showers and storms across the southeastern U.S. through the Carolinas on Saturday. This front clears the coast and gets off to the Atlantic as we get into early next week around Monday, and we're just talking about maybe some lingering snow showers associated with the upper level low spinning over the Great Lakes. Generally a quiet start to next week, though, as far as precipitation goes. And this is where we get into this part of the forecast here, late February into early March, where, a couple of days ago, we were talking about some of these really big lows running from Texas through the Ohio Valley with really soaking rains across this region. And now we're seeing kind of a resurgence of, at least weak ridging here and weak troughing. So the flow is no longer raging out of the southwest, kind of diving out of the northwest. So this is what that does to your precipitation chances. I mean, we still get these areas of low pressure passing through, but this is not a soaking rain across the Mid-South. This is now some snow, some light snow across the Great Lakes, a quick frontal passage through the Ohio Valley. And then we get some showers and storms renewed across portions of the southeastern U.S. This will be all the way out late next week, Thursday, Friday, February 26th through the 27th. And then we get just kind of more, this crashing front with flow over the top of it. This doesn't really give you a soaking rain event. You see, here's more low pressure systems here, not connected, and just kind of quickly traversing with a dry passage here. This would be March 2nd into March 3rd. And then the potential for another, weak ejecting system here. So kind of a bit of a big change as to how these systems are ejecting and the impact of the potential moisture along with them. So if I just load up, total precipitation from this model run, we're still talking about getting into that 2 to 4 inch range across the southeast, thanks to the lingering precip this weekend, and then that next front potentially late next week. But see how far back I can go here. I guess the farthest I can go is yesterday morning, but even a big change here as I just toggle back and forth. Here's the European model from yesterday morning. Check out the values here across parts of the eastern Corn Belt, where we're looking at 1 to 2 inches of rain up toward the Great Lakes. And then look at what happens now. The latest run really takes a bite out of that with just, systems coming out of the northwest, trailing front here, catching some flow and some moisture. We kind of shift and shrink the precipitation area from being something like this to really being confined to the southeastern U.S. If I pull up the European ensemble model, we'll look at the probabilistic forecast along with this. So here's your probability of picking up over half an inch of rain. Let me extend this. This is the midnight run. Here's the yesterday evening run. We'll take this out. Let's just look at the next 10 days. Let's keep it real here. We don't need to go out the whole 15-day forecast period here with such uncertainty. Now, where we've got that high confidence of half an inch or more, we've got a system here that's ongoing across portions of the prairie, bringing some badly needed moisture to parts of Saskatchewan and Manitoba here as we head through the end of the week. You got that good chance here across the Great Lakes down into the southeastern U.S. But when I flip it over to 1 inch, we start looking at who's really going to get a decent drink. 1 inch, and then here is 2 inch. 1 inch here, we're talking about, you can see the probabilities here at the bottom, about 50% from Indy over towards, Toledo. You get into the 60 to 70% chance as you get towards some of the higher terrain here. But the eastern Corn Belt, down into the lower Mississippi Valley, what looked like a really great pattern here during the end of February. I don't want to cancel out. Like I said here, Eric and Matt will be back. They'll talk more in depth about this one. But some changes I don't love seeing as I was kind of going about the forecast here, thinking, we got this Wednesday, Thursday chance for rain across this area, and then we've got more systems to come. It doesn't look like a slam dunk right now that those systems, late February into early March are going to produce soaking rains across the region. And again, here's your 10-day probability of 2 inches or more, and we've really taken a pretty big bite out of across this area. Again, this is the run that came out last night. Here's the one from yesterday morning. Not a huge change, but you can certainly see kind of shrinking some of those values there. So before I go ahead and cancel out that whole, late February, early March run of forecast, I'll go ahead and just kind of trail off and walk it back here. So what I want to do real quick then is just look at temperatures here. Again, I mentioned we're going to see a bit of a cool down across the central and eastern U.S. as we head through the end of the weekend. Again, very warm right now in advance of that big trough across the western U.S. A lot of warmth being driven northward. But as I walk through the weekend, and you see some colder air coming in from the prairies, encroaching on the northern and central plains, getting into the central Corn Belt here over the weekend. And then that cooler air mass spreads all the way down to the Gulf as we get into, again, February 23rd and 24th. So a big shot of cold air east of the Rockies as we get into early next week. This has been a bit of a not a change in the forecast, but something that's gotten, I would say early next week into mid next week, that February 20th through the 26th time frame has gotten a little less wet and a little colder east of the Rockies than it looked just a couple of days ago. Now, it's not a full, again, send into the Arctic. We get rebounded. Some warm air pushing back in as we get into, Wednesday and Thursday next week with the potential for, more cold air to try and filter its way in during that first week of March. We'll just kind of have to watch this right now. But it doesn't necessarily look like a full-on, launch into spring across the Ohio Valley, parts of the lower Mississippi Valley here with unimpeded warmth and storm systems running across the area. It looks like the pattern's going to continue to ebb and flow. That's very characteristic of this transition from La Nina into El Nino. I think that across the board, Eric and Matt and myself, we still have high confidence that we're going to continue to push into a stormy pattern across these regions during the spring months, potentially. A very different flavor in the summer, late summer into the fall, even across portions of the Corn Belt, thanks to that El Nino influence. But it may sputter to a start here, and I think we're going to get a couple early runs at storm systems here this week, and then things are going to have to kind of sort themselves out late February into early March. I hope you have a great day. If you're across the southern plains, parts of the Midwest, be aware of that fire weather risk today. Again, just, don't do anything outside that could start up a fire. Anything that gets ignited out there will have the potential to get out of control really quickly. And then, of course, watching out for that risk for a couple of strong to severe storms, maybe a few tornadoes and damaging wind reports, a couple of, instances of severe hail, especially along Interstate 70. If I were to give an area to watch tomorrow, I would say St. Louis to Effingham over towards Indianapolis, probably the hot spot for anything severe during the day on Thursday. I hope you have a wonderful day. I look forward to an opportunity to speak with you all down the road.